Your top rep just had the best month of their career. 3 weeks later, you don't recognize them. Activity drops, follow up gets sloppy, and opportunities stop moving. Every sales leader has a version of this story. Someone has an incredible month. They hit every number, they seem completely locked in, and then a few weeks later, they've gone quiet. When you ask what's going on, they tell you that they've just been feeling off and they need to get their motivation back. So you do what most leaders do. You call a meeting and then you run a sales contest and then you give a pep talk and it works for a few weeks. And then it fades and you're right back where you started. I want to walk you through why that keeps happening and what fixes it, because it isn't motivation. Let's start with why the motivation fix feels right in the first place. It is because motivation is visible. When someone's feeling good, they move faster, they sound more confident, and they take more action. When they are discouraged, you can see the change almost immediately. So naturally, when performance drops, your brain goes straight to fix that feeling. And to be fair, that instinct isn't wrong. It's just incomplete. Sales is brutal. Rejection, delayed decisions, deals that vanish after what felt like a sure thing. There are real moments where a team needs perspective, encouragement, a reminder that one bad week doesn't define them. That kind of support has a place, and I'm not telling you to stop caring about morale. The trouble starts when performance spikes for a few days or weeks every time you rally the team, then it sinks back down the second your energy fades. Your team hasn't gotten more consistent. They've responded to a temporary surge. And the leader who keeps running that play because it works is measuring the wrong thing. The meeting felt productive, activity went up, everybody felt focused, all true for a few weeks. Recently, I was coaching a sales leader, and we'll call him Derek, running a team of 8. Derek was great in a room, inspiring, the kind of leader that people wanted to work for. But over about a year, he was noticing something that was really bothering him. Follow-up improved every time he brought it up. The pipeline got cleaned up every time he brought it up or when he was reviewing it. Activity spiked during a contest. And the second his attention moved to another part of the business that he needed to concentrate on, the old behavior crept right back in. Derek hadn't done anything wrong on purpose, but without meaning to, he'd become the engine restarting the team every few weeks instead of a leader running a team that could sustain its own performance. That is an exhausting place to sit because it means your team's output depends on how much urgency you personally can generate indefinitely with no end date. Nobody sets out to build that dynamic, I don't think. It happens because both sides get the same short-term payoff. The leader steps in, performance improves, and everyone reads that improvement as the proof the intervention worked. Nobody stops to ask the better question, which is, what can this team actually sustain once I step back? That's where standards come in. Standards are not about micromanaging every minute of someone's day. They give people a clear picture of how the role is supposed to be performed on a completely ordinary day, the kind where no one feels especially inspired. Without that clarity, too many decisions get made in the moment. A salesperson starts the day knowing in theory that they need to generate more business, but nobody's defined what that means in practice. So they answer a few messages, they knock out some admin work, they probably over-prepare for a meeting or a call that didn't need it, and they respond to whatever feels most urgent right in front of them. The important work, the stuff that creates revenue, keeps sliding later into the day. By the time later arrives, the day is full, the energy is low, and you know what happens? It gets pushed off until tomorrow. So what is this? Well, it is usually a role that was never defined clearly enough for the most important activities to become a baseline instead of a daily negotiation. Standards settle some of those decisions before the person is tired, discouraged, or tempted to avoid that uncomfortable work. This doesn't mean that every rep needs the identical daily number of volume and routine. A high volume transactional sales environment probably needs tight daily activity tracking because a slowdown is going to show up really fast. A longer sales cycle is going to probably care more about that weekly account development or conversations with decision makers, proposals, or some sort of movement towards a decision. Some reps live off inbound leads. Others have to create demand from scratch. The standard has to fit your business, the cycle, and the role. Do not use any generic template. Every sales team needs clarity in the same 4 places: activity, follow-up, pipeline, and conversion. Start with activity. That means the specific things a salesperson directly controls that create an opportunity or move one forward. Depending on your business, that could mean new conversations, meetings held, referrals that they ask for, new accounts, demos, proposals, or touch points with the actual decision makers in a deal. You don't need to track everything that someone does during a day. You need to find the small handful of meaningful activities that actually correlate with results, because someone can look and feel very busy from 8 to 6 every single day without moving any deals forward. They've researched, they overprepared, they reorganized their CRM, and they only worked the leads that felt comfortable. Then they're tired at the end of the day, nothing moved. A clear activity standard is the only thing that tells both of you the difference between busy and productive. Then there's follow-up. Every leader has said, follow up more consistently in a meeting and then watched it improve for a few days, maybe weeks, because it's fresh, and watched it quietly slide right back to where it was. That happens because nobody agrees on what good follow-up means. One rep is going to think that reaching out once in a while counts as follow-up, and another keeps a dead lead open for 4 months because the prospect never technically said no. A third one might think that a deal is progressing because the last call felt positive, even though there is no agreed next step anywhere. All 3 believe that they are doing it right. A real follow-up standard answers a few specific questions. How fast does a new lead get contacted? Very important. What happens immediately after a real conversation? Who owns the next step? How long can something sit with 0 activity before it gets flagged? And what has to get logged? It doesn't need to cover every scenario. Do not exhaust yourself even trying to do that. It just needs to remove enough ambiguity that people stop reinventing the process every single time. Pipeline definitions need the same clarity. One rep logs every early, barely qualified conversation. Another waits until prospect seems serious before it even goes into the CRM. One keeps old opportunities open forever because they think, well, they might come back. Another purges anything stale because they want their pipeline looking clean. You end up staring at a healthy looking total pipeline value while half of it has no recent activity, no next step, and no real chance of closing. Then the end of the month arrives and the number feels like it came out of nowhere. You don't need 12 pipeline stages. You need a small number, the smallest number that makes sense. And every single person on your team needs to understand what those mean. What qualifies as a real opportunity? What has to be true before it advances a stage? What info has to be in that record? And what happens when something stalls? Last is conversion. It tells you where deals are actually falling out of the process, and it's the piece that requires the most judgment. One rep generates plenty of opportunities but can't get past that first real conversation. Another closes beautifully once a prospect is near a decision but never generates enough opportunities to even begin with. And a third has strong activity and a full pipeline but too many deals, so they just evaporate before a decision gets made. All three can miss the same number while needing completely different support. A weak conversion number could mean that there's a skill gap, there's a pricing issue, there's poor qualification, weak follow-up, or something happened earlier in the funnel that has nothing to do with the rep at all. The number is useful for telling you where to look. It becomes useless, even harmful, the second you treat it as proof that someone just needs to work harder. Keep the whole system simple enough to actually use. A lot of leaders fall into the same trap once they realize they need standards. They overcorrect and then they build a monster. Ask me how I know. Every call, every email, every task, every percentage becomes a field on a scorecard that they're looking at. And then the meeting gets longer and reps spend more time reporting on the work than actually doing it. And then you end up drowning in more data than you can even realistically use. A good system tells you at a glance whether the team is creating enough opportunity, whether follow-up is happening, whether the pipeline is real, and where the conversation is breaking down. It should also flag when someone needs clearer direction or more skill, a better process, or a direct conversation. If your tracking doesn't help you make one of those calls, it is not managing anything. It is just extra work. A short list of numbers that you can trust is best. When possible, pull data from the tools your team is already using. The second that someone has to log the same activity in the CRM and then a spreadsheet and maybe a scorecard or a weekly report, the data is going to get inconsistent, junk in, junk out. Your team is going to resent the reporting. You're not going to have good stuff. And then you are stuck reconciling the 4 different versions of what happened. Once the standards exist, review them on a consistent rhythm because this only works if the numbers are real. Don't just check in when the month is going badly. If you ignore the pipeline for a month and then suddenly you get intensely interested in the last few days of the month, your team is going to experience this standard as pressure, not as how the business actually should run. Some of this needs a daily glance. Some of it makes more sense just weekly or monthly. The point is, catching problems early enough to respond to them without treating every normal dip as a fire alarm. When someone falls below the standard, find out why before you react. Sometimes the expectation was never clear. Sometimes the skill isn't there yet. It could also be that the process is clunky or unrealistic, or the lead quality has changed. That does happen. Some situations call for clarity, maybe training, coaching, or fixing the process, not necessarily always a consequence. But sometimes the expectation is clear, the person understands it completely, and they're still not doing the work. That's a different conversation, and it's the one that a lot of leaders avoid. This is where you have to be careful not to carry their improvement for them. Many leaders quietly start doing the work their team should be doing. You schedule another coaching session, you build another plan, you send more resources, you check in more often. The rep sits in the meeting, they nod, they agree with everything, and they go right back to operating the same exact way. Pay attention to what happens between conversations, not during them. Are they practicing their skills? Are they following the plan? Taking initiative when something isn't working? Progress will not be a straight line, and that's fine. But you should be able to see them participating in their own development, in their own success. If the effort's there, keep coaching. If it isn't, more support just becomes a polite way of delaying accountability. Leadership has real obligations. Set a fair standard, communicate it clearly, give people the tools that the role requires, and respond honestly to the evidence. But your rep has obligations too. Show up, do the work, use the support that you give them, and adjust when the results say something has to change. You cannot improve someone who is not willing to participate in their own improvement. Nobody can. When someone keeps missing a clearly communicated standard with no evidence they're taking ownership, you have to address it directly. Name the expectation, name what's happened, name what needs to change, and name what happens if it doesn't. The consequence depends on your business and the severity. closer oversight, a formal plan, fewer company provided leads, a different role, or removal. This isn't about rash decisions or torching someone over a bad week. It's really more about the pattern that continued after you already gave that clarity and support. Something else that happens when leaders underestimate the pattern and it goes unaddressed. The standard loses its credibility with everyone else. The people who are actually hitting the number notice exactly who's getting a pass, an extra coaching, and endless chances while they're doing their job. Left alone for long enough, your inconsistency creates more resentment on the team than the original performance problem ever could have. The goal in all of this is independence, not permanent support. Think about a rep who needs you on every important call because they are not comfortable handling the decision stage solo. Joining the first time is useful. You can observe, help them prep, give feedback, but the second and third time, they need to carry more of it themselves until eventually they're running that conversation alone, unless it is some unusual case. Confidence gets built through reps and feedback, and it's not through you being permanently in the room. If you never step back, they never get the evidence that they can do it without you. Motivation works the same way. You can absolutely help someone regain perspective after a hard stretch, and you should. The goal is for them to take that, re-engage, and keep moving without needing the identical emotional reset every few weeks. Once you see it that way, your job stops being raising the energy in the room every time part of the process slips, and it becomes finding the actual breakdown and fixing that specific thing. Sometimes that's clarifying a standard. Sometimes that is a skill gap, a clunky process, a workload issue, or a direct conversation with someone who isn't owning their part. That is far more precise than trying to get the energy in the entire room every time one piece of the sales process starts sliding. Remember, you can still inspire people. You can still celebrate wins. You can challenge weak thinking, help your team through a rough patch. None of that goes away, but the sales function has to be able to keep running when your attention is focused somewhere else in the business. And that's what it takes to be able to scale. No business can depend on one person permanently generating everybody else's urgency and confidence and momentum. Pick one part of your sales process where performance only seems to improve after you personally step in. A reminder, a push, a pep talk. Define what good execution looks like there. Keep the standards simple enough to track without a spreadsheet nightmare. Then pay close attention to what happens when it's missed, what support gets offered, and what the person does with it. Your job is clarity, tools, coaching, and fair accountability. Their job is showing up and doing the work. A team should be strengthened by your energy. It should never be dependent on you recreating that energy from scratch every few weeks for the rest of your career. This is the exact kind of work that we do inside Vasana. We look at what's happening in the business and we look at what's happening in the person leading it, because both move that number. Sometimes it's a missed standard or a weak process. Sometimes the system's fine and the leader just has become the one carrying the team. Separating those two things is the most important part of the job. If this is a pattern that you're seeing in your business, subscribe. I break down real leadership, sales, and business systems here every week, built to help you run a company that doesn't depend on you for every decision, every reset, and every result.